Sometimes I can get a little bit carried away. Can you raise just one eyebrow with your eyes open? I've been trying to do this all morning while you were all working, and I can't really do it. It feels really awkward, but maybe you can do it. You're just cooler than me. Chapter 8, Energy and Metabolism. So we're talking about matter and energy and transforming it, laws of thermodynamics, all that fun, good stuff. Okay, so metabolism is the reactions that occur in a living organism, all of them, the sum total. We call that your metabolism. Some of you have a fast metabolism. Most of you don't have a slow metabolism because you're all little people. Older, big people like me have a slower metabolism, which is why it's harder to keep the weight off, so to speak, and we get fatter and fatter as we get older. If you want an idea of that, look at your parents. You can see what it'll be like when you get older. You'll be the same size as them. That's generally speaking, unless you maybe change your habits or diet or whatever. Slow metabolism, fast metabolism. Fast metabolism is described as that because it burns a lot of energy. Okay, energy in the form of ATP and thus calories, as we described. Okay, so we're going to set up these metabolic pathways, and metabolic pathways is a series of reactions to get to an end product. And each step within that whole series of reactions is catalyzed by a specific enzyme. We'll get to enzymes at the second half of Chapter 8 here, but you can see A goes to B, B goes to C, and C to D. These are all regulated by certain enzymes, and this enables us to down or upregulate each specific reaction. So every enzyme could have an inhibitor, for example, and you could block this reaction. Or you could upregulate and turn it on faster. So from A to B, you produce more of B because you enhance or produce more of enzyme 1, for example. Catabolic pathways now break down complex molecules into simpler ones, and this releases energy. The easy way to remember this is in Anatomy Phys, we dissect cats and we chop them all up and make them into smaller pieces from one big pieces. I know if you have a cat, I'm sorry. Meow! But they release energy, and this is a good thing, energy that is usable. Okay, we can use that energy now to create ATP, such as the food you eat, break it down into smaller pieces, release that energy, make ATP out of it, take that ATP elsewhere to use that energy for something else. Anabolic pathways, think steroids, right? My big muscles, not the result of steroids, but you take teeny tiny molecules that are simple and you build bigger complicated ones, like anabolic steroids help to build bigger muscles. This requires energy. These reactions are endergonic, as you'll learn in a second. And you have to input energy into the system for it to work. Okay? Energy, hopefully you all know from review in chem, is the capacity or the ability to cause change, to have an effect, and to perform work. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion. Potential energy is the energy that's stored in a substance or in matter that can be potentially released, including chemical energy. Okay, that's stored in bonds. That's potential energy. Such as this person going down, he's converting potential energy into chemical energy. I'll review. You guys are too smart for that. Thermodynamics is now looking at these energy transformations and studying them. So the first law is energy can be transferred and transformed, but it cannot be created or destroyed. So energy just shuttles and shuffles between different forms from one thing to the other. Okay? Here's an example of energy conversion. Oh, that makes me kind of hungry. Here you have a cheetah eating, I don't know, my son would be able to tell you what it is. Is it a gazelle or is it an antelope? I don't know. Interesting side note, I went to the wild animal park, safari park this past weekend and went to the cheetah run. Watched the cheetah run right across in front of me super fast. That was pretty sweet. You guys ought to do that if you haven't done it. Those cheetahs are quite fast. Second law of thermodynamics is entropy. So spontaneous changes don't require energy input because they increase entropy, and entropy is constantly increasing. Disorder is increasing, essentially. So in this case, the disorder is added to the cheetah's surroundings in the form of heat and small molecules that are byproducts of metabolism coming off in the form of CO2 and H2O there. Second law. Okay, so living systems have a problem. They live in a world dominated by entropy, and as that entropy is increasing, they need to maintain order. They don't want to fall apart and break into smaller pieces like the cats in class. Okay? So they need energy to maintain order, and they constantly need to eat, to constantly input more and more energy to maintain that structure and order. Okay? 8.2, free energy change allows the reaction to occur spontaneously, or tells us whether it will occur spontaneously or not. So here's endergonic and exergonic, okay? Delta G, or free energy, we represent here as delta G. It's related to enthalpy, although we'll talk almost nothing about enthalpy. Mostly we'll talk about free energy, or delta G. Okay, so organisms live at the expense of free energy, meaning we kind of don't. We have to override this idea of free energy because spontaneity wants to happen. It wants to move towards equilibrium and towards stabilized systems, but we don't always want to do that. So we again have to input energy to override this. Okay, free energy decreases and the stability of a system increases. That's an important note there. So here we have a system that's at equilibrium. This is maximum stability. Okay, free energy has decreased as the stability of the system increased. Oops. Here's an exergonic reaction. The reactants have more free energy than the products, so energy is released to go from the reactants to the products. Thus, delta G is less than 0, as you can see here. That's exergonic. So the release of a phosphate from ATP is exergonic. It gives off energy. Okay, that's the opposite of endergonic, where energy needs to be input from reactants to products, and thus delta G is greater than 0. Now, this distinction is important because endergonic reactions are non-spontaneous, and you need to couple them with spontaneous reactions that are exergonic so that the energy released from the exergonic system will provide or apply to the endergonic reaction. A closed system will eventually reach equilibrium, such as in this hydroelectric system, because it's going towards more stability. Okay? Now, this is the same as cells in our body. There's a constant flow of materials in and out, and this prevents metabolic pathways from reaching equilibrium. They are trying to get there. They're constantly trying to reach equilibrium. That's stability and decreasing free energy, but we don't let them because we're constantly making and inputting energy. So while we won't talk about cellular respiration now, that's for a later date, cellular respiration is an example of this because glucose is broken, I don't know why it's misspelled there, down in a series of exergonic reactions. Each one of these is exergonic, and that gives off energy that is then used to perform work elsewhere. Okay. Now, what kind of work are we talking about that's being performed? There's 3 types. There's mechanical. Yeah, that was mechanical. There's transport. I guess that was kind of mechanical because I used my muscles to do it. And then there's chemical. Strong. Here's what I talked about. Endergonic and exergonic reactions are coupled together. The exergonic is going to drive the endergonic. There must be enough energy released from the exergonic to drive the endergonic reaction to make it happen, to override the energy necessary to make the endergonic happen. But that's why we couple these reactions together, and hence the basis of ATP in our cells. The cell's energy shuttle provides energy for cellular functions. Here you see the 3 phosphate groups. Here you see ribose and adenine. Together these form adenosine. Okay, ATP is a nucleotide, just like the A of DNA, with the only difference being that we've added 2 phosphates here, essentially, to make it ATP. Now, energy gets released from ATP when the terminal or the last phosphate group is broken off. This is a hydrolysis reaction, of course, and the phosphate comes off. This I stands for inorganic. Okay, it's no longer attached to this organic molecule. It's just a free-floating phosphate, PO4. And now you have ADP, and energy has been released, and that energy can be used to perform work. Okay. Here's an example of an endergonic reaction combining glutamic acid or glutamate and ammonia to form glutamine. Delta G here for this reaction is positive 3.4. It's not going to happen spontaneously. We need to add in energy to this system to make it happen. So we couple it with an exergonic reaction who gives off, or whose delta G is 7.3. This should be a negative, not a positive. Okay, that's a mistake. But you couple those 2 together, and the overall delta G is now going to be negative, and the reaction, those 2 together, will happen spontaneously. Okay. ATP is the driving force behind these endergonic reactions. Almost all of those in your body. And keep in mind, it might not be ATP, it might be GTP or TTP, where the G stands for guanine, like of DNA, because it's a nucleotide, or the T stands for thymine, like of DNA, because it's a nucleotide. Okay, here's an example showing you the mechanical work, like the motor proteins of a muscle, the transport work, such as moving ions across a membrane, and the chemical work, combining chemicals, producing glutamine, for example, in this case. Catabolism or catabolic pathways, as we previously mentioned, to break stuff down. So ATP to ADP is a catabolic reaction. Okay, catabolic pathways drive the regeneration of ATP from ADP and phosphate. And anabolic, of course, is the opposite. So hopefully you get the idea of that. You see this system. You're constantly regenerating ATP. The energy from some catabolic reaction helps to reform the ATP. Then you give off that energy. And then another catabolic reaction, you couple this endergonic reaction with another exergonic reaction, and that helps to drive the reformation of ATP. Okay? And on this note, we're going to stop, and we'll see you in part 2. I'm out.